there's always been that argument around older games being better than games coming out today. And people always, to try to disprove this, will point out one or two games that are, well, at least they liked, and because of that, that disproves your entire argument. Like when I talked about, well, older games are just better, gaming as a hobby is just better. Someone will be like, oh, well, the Alan Wake's good, therefore what you're saying is wrong. It's like when people say this, they're not just talking about any singular game. Like they're talking about gaming as a hobby, the gaming industry as well, an industry, game companies. It's like, okay, what is Alan Wake? It's a $300 million overglorified walking simulator that costs $300 million, right? And it's like, okay, maybe it's good. Like, I'm not saying it's terrible. I mean, I've never played it. I don't care for walking simulators. But, I mean, $300 million, and that's, I don't know, one of few possible good games, like in a slew of garbage games. And the fact that games are being mass produced, right? Games take longer to make, they take more money to make, they're being mass produced. You're not getting any new IPs, or if you are, you're barely getting any new IPs, or you're just getting the same prequel, sequel, remake, remaster, reimagining. That if anything, they just take away more than they add. And again, people are seeing this, and they're like, okay, well, where the fuck has gaming gone? Like, why aren't we getting? Because back then we had bad games, right? But at least they were bad for. At least they took risks, and they were just bad games in comparison. But now, what's a bad game? Well, a game like Concord that cost $400 million, which is touted as effectively going to be the next Star Wars, and barely even 600 people at max played the game, and they had to give it back. And what is Star Wars Outlaws, which is just, your run of the mill Ubisoft schlop, or it just has a vapid open world. It's like you have these IPs that were giants, but now they're being reduced to absolutely nothing. And to be fair, now there's actually legitimately good games coming out, but they're very few and far in between. So I was giving this video, and my dog's probably going to want me to take her out now that I'm actually fucking doing my video. Lucy does all the fucking time. But let's give it a watch.
Hey guys, do you ever just wanna... Or
Oh,
even...
God.
Because I do. Like, all the time. The truth is, I haven't been excited about a new release for a very long time. The last new game that I was really anticipating would have been like Outlast Trials or the anniversary edition of Beyond Good and Evil, a game which came out in 2003, by the way, and even that I was anticipating with caution because, it is Ubisoft and nobody wants to see their favorite game ruined. When I have spare time,
and most remakes are like, oh hey, guess what? You gotta sign up to our goofy Ubisoft fucking launcher, which nobody wants to. Like, no one wants to consent to having their data sold, like data gathered and sold, right? I didn't even buy the anniversary. I just bought the old version that's pretty fucked of Beyond Good and Evil, right? And that's what you see. You see remakes coming out, and they're like, oh, sign up for our bullshit. And it's like, no. And then you have remakes that are changed for no reason. And I'm at this point where, one, if it's a prequel or a sequel or a remake, it's already in hot water for me. But if you make even the slightest change, I'm already disinterested. right? Like, the idea that you think you can do better than what came before baffles me, and I refuse to support that idea with my money.
Want to chill and just immerse myself in a different world, I go for games that are like 20 years old or somewhere around that. If you watched my channel at all, you will know that I'm somebody that appreciates the finer details in games. I really love worlds that feel alive, eccentric characters, cozy environments. I like beautiful things like art, and of course, my favorite, I like clothing and accessories. More and more, I'm finding that modern.
Yeah, it taking the dog out. Wee. Oh, and you see games like these that came out, right? And there's a hell of a lot more attention to detail because it was gaming as an art form. Oh, get out of here. All right, but games nowadays are just not that. Like, every aspect and every detail of a game is, does it make us money? Can we skimp on this? Can we skimp on that? Like, Black Myth Wukong, for instance, like, I think the level cap is, and I don't want to fucking sound stupid, so I'm gonna look this up because there's a reason why this is the level cap. See, I'm doing on the spot journalism. You see it here, folks, on my phone. Level cap for Black Myth Wukong. And then there's an actual reason, like 342 is the level cap for Black Myth Wukong, and it's that way because it said in the actual legend that he lived for 342 years. Like, if you look this up, in actual legend, that's how much he lived. So it's not random, and again, that's why they have it in the game. And this is what I mean when you have such a level of detail that on the surface doesn't really mean anything unless you actually look into it. Then you're like, oh, okay, this is good. And I stole this idea. It's like a good product is an onion and with layers and layers of quality, where a bad product is a bad onion with layers and layers of garbage. Like, you see a bad game just on the surface, right? Then you figure out, oh, they're being inflammatory to their audience, to their consumers, to gamers, and oh, they're skimping on art and they're skimping on things. Like, and you see this with Assassin's Creed Shadow, the fact that they are using a religious relic that under no circumstances can you use in your games because it's copyrighted. And even in the reveal and the showcase of the game, you see that it, like, on like a, the 3D model of that on a computer. Like, there is a competency crisis, and incompetence breeds incompetence, which breeds an incompetent product.
Games have nothing to offer me, and I do want to preface this by saying that this is strictly my opinion, but you would think that with the technology that we have now, all of those things that I mentioned earlier could be improved upon tenfold, but alas, we are given bland worlds, sometimes a lecture in politics, and the erasure of femininity in gaming. The last point in particular
By the time
YouTube
this
is
NFL
unplayable
fan
without
has
fucking
finished
ad
drinking
block.
his
I should
Pepsi,
stop using.
There is something
start
that I,
using-
as a female gamer, really hate to see, because in the industry's attempt to become more inclusive and conscious of the issues that women deal with when it comes to depictions in media, they've actually gone and made femininity inherently evil and sexualized.
Yeah.
Through different companies' actions, we're being shown that beauty and beautiful women have no space in modern gaming, that they're just too much. Aside from that, their portrayal of what it means to be a strong woman suggests that we need to be able to physically overpower our male opponents. The greatest example of this for me is Abby from The Last of Us 2, who is not only the least relatable female protagonist I've seen in like any game ever, she's also said to be extremely unlikable from the start for what she does to our beloved Joel. The game tries its best to make you sympathize with her by telling you her part of the story, but the combination of her unrealistic build and her actions throughout the game just make me resent her. And yes, it is an
Yeah, in the case of Last of Us 2, like, Neil Druckmann knew exactly what he was doing, because, again, he hated the game, he hated the IP, he did not like the consumer base, and he effectively wanted it to just be one massive rant against its consumer. And I can understand why people liked The Last of Us 2, like, it was actually a legitimately okay game as far as visuals and art style, and it functioned, which is the bare minimum. But I mean, I can see why people liked it, but the story is what cut it off for most people. And again, in the case of Starfield, even I, who like Starfield, can understand why someone would think it's bland and boring. I just like goofy sci-fi bullshit, and hey, you know, I'm allowed to like shitty stuff. But again, you see this with even games that came out that they're trying to use morality as a shield to defend bad products and to impose moral values and this moral crusade over the products. And in such cases, no longer art, because we have to act like, you know, having like not even a hot female character, just a feminine features in gaming is bad and and evil. And this is because of the moral crusaders on Twitter and the people who itched their way into these companies that were pretty much hired to cover the company's ass. But this isn't making good products. I'm probably gonna have to get my dog. Be back. Oh, Lucy. And again, you know, this is brought about by people who, again, they don't like gaming, they don't like the industry they're in, but they know it's popular, and they know, oh, well, if they want to actually make something of themselves, which they pretty much won't, I mean, everyone will universally dislike these individuals, and it's these consultants that, for some reason, companies seem to want to hire or seem to want to outsource their storytelling to, that don't add to art. It universally just takes away, and they know this, right? And they even justify it. They're like, oh, well, we're trying to change people's perceptions. Like, they believe that if they remove femininity and add ugliness, that people will just like ugly people and ugly characters, and that's just not how it works in art. But again, if you go to a university and if you know, if you go to these whatever studies, gender studies, colonial studies, you only have one real way of fighting, one real way of combating and understanding and interacting with the world. And that's how these individuals do it.
Unrealistic build. I'm sorry, but we are in a post-apocalyptic world. Even if she did have access to like top-of-the-line gym equipment in her commune, I doubt that they could ration enough greens and protein for her meal prep to allow her enough time to even get close to that physique. You would need some post-apocalyptic steroids, which sets an unhealthy standard, by the way, to make it make sense. But no,
Yeah, and they don't care. Like, and see, this is a nitpick, but again, you have bad game design, bad storytelling, bad characters, and people are just going to nitpick them even more.
the industry thinks I'm an idiot because I'm supposed to say, oh, great, a strong woman, because there's nothing other than huge muscular arms that could mean a strong woman. Going back to an old game, I'll compare Abby to Jade from Beyond Good and Evil. Now, this game originally came out in 2003, and the protagonist is actually more of a tomboy, but she's still very charming, and the game encourages you to find ways other than physical fighting to progress. It has great stealth, she is brave, she wants to expose her government for their evil doings, just a very likable character and someone that you could root for. She looks pretty and somehow is in no way sexualized. Weird that they could do that, right?
Yeah, these people know how to do it. Again, they put in time, money, and effort to do the opposite. It's like, you can't tell me that a multi-billion-dollar company does not understand how to make these characters. It's, the consultants that are like are telling the artists, they're telling the writers, no, you have to make this character this way. You have to tune this down, this art. You have to tune down sexuality. And you have artists, you have game devs pointing this out, but it's this culture of toxic positivity where you're just not allowed to point out blatantly wrong things, blatantly bad design choices, blatantly bad gameplay choices. And when you have that type of situation, you get games like Concord, which nobody fucking played. Maybe like 100 people played on the regular, right? Like, you get games like Star Wars Outlaws, which is for nobody. And they even say, oh, it's the first open world Star Wars. So they completely erase Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. And they completely erase Star Wars Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. Well, yeah, I'd say it's open world, but kind of linear. But yeah, they erase the past. Like, they believe, no, now that this is where it begins. Now that it's popular, now that they're normies, everything that came, the diversity, the good characters that came before just do not exist.
Speaking of unlikable characters, let's talk about Concord. Aside from the fact that none of the characters are appealing in any way, and I do mean male or female, they're also just poorly designed.
Yeah,
there is no personality to them, no depth, nothing that would inspire me to, want to cosplay them, for example. And I mean, half of them look like they're a ripoff of something that already exists. Sindel from Mortal Kombat has certainly seen better days. You compare these to heroes from other hero shooters, even the free-to-play ones, and you can see that there's a massive difference. Like, these are beloved characters, people have cosplayed these, they're memorable, people that haven't even played the games know who they are and would likely know them by name as well. Whereas Concord's heroes are at best like 800 V-Bucks Fortnite skins. And you know what? Even Fortnite skins have more personality than what they've created here.
Yep.
We know by now that when something like this gets any sort of criticism, the industry will tell you that it doesn't matter because it's the opinion of straight men, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, and again, this came about by evangelical Christians in the West, in America, because they fight literally the same goddamn way. Like, these individuals, these woke individuals fight the same, like, the battles the same way. It's like, oh, instead of the devil, instead of, all those bad things, it's straight white men and male gamers, right? And again, they act the same way because we only have one fucking tactic. But the thing is, with the evangelicals, at least there's an end goal. There is no end goal with these types of people. It's morality for the sake of morality, to make themselves feel good, like they're to make themselves feel like they're adding good. But again, hate does not create. And again, you have games like Dustborn and games like Concord, which were made with hateful intentions, and people are rightfully not playing them.
Which, by the way, great job ignoring and vilifying like a huge chunk of your audience. However, when I as a woman express my opinions and say that I don't like it, I explain the issues that I have with it, I will be told that I'm just being a pick-me girl, pandering to the men that don't like it.
Oh yeah, and it's the same thing with Christians that would call out other Christians, call out like the evangelicals, the televangelists, the mega churches. They'll be like, oh, well, I guess you're just not a real Christian, right? I guess you're not like it is the same tactic being used again, and for some reason they're so tone deaf and they don't understand that these are the exact same tactics. It's almost sad. It's like, please, for the love of God, just call me a fucking slur. For one, just say something outside the textbook of just what we've already had to deal with.
Give me a break. A dragon break. You're telling me straight up that a woman is incapable of coming to that conclusion on her own without men telling her that that is the way. You know what they call that? So yeah, instead of arguing with you and getting called a talentless freak, actual quote from Concord developer,
Yep.
I'm just gonna go and create a new Minecraft world. So as I have said, beautiful women in gaming seem to be an absolute no-go nowadays, and we see this in the new Star Wars Outlaws. It feels like the developers literally went out of their way to diminish this character's looks, especially when you compare her to her face model. Like they
Yeah, I mean, you look at this and you see that they've put in time, money, and effort to make her as unattractive, unappealing, look like she's in her late 30s, and this is a game that's for adolescent young men. Like, let's be honest, that's why that was the demographic that liked Star Wars, right? And you point this out, and it's like you're the bad guy for pointing this out. And it's like, okay, so what is this product for exactly? So who are you trying to sell it to? Because nobody played Concord, nobody played Outlaw, nobody's going to play Assassin's Creed Shadow. Who are these games for? Right? My mother isn't going to play these fucking games. I need you to understand this. So, why? And I know why, but sometimes you really just have to keep asking the fucking question.
They really did her dirty, and in their attempt to make this character less attractive, I actually think that they made her look not human.
Yeah, she
People
looks like a
don't
freak.
look like that. Of course, the game is currently receiving backlash for a lot of other things, mainly how it feels so unfinished and broken, but aside from how she looks, it's also the fact that developers are held to these quotas at all. So they were, quote, pushing for a black or female lead in a Star Wars game. Now, what this tells me is that the character and the story don't matter as much as their identity. So this is why we're no longer getting...
And again, it's odd to say it because it's like, okay, what are the people doing the coding, the artists, the people, doing the aesthetics and like the world, or like the consultants, the HR lady, the individuals that probably have never made a game in their life, but they're over this project. I guess they're kind of considered developers now. Like, it's really difficult to pin this down. I understand why people just choose not to and just choose to lump everyone in the same category. And again, I don't blame developers out just like treating this like any other job, because it is soul crushing when someone who has never made a game in their life, have never been over a game in their entire life, they're just hired on because of ideological nepotism, and they tell you what you can or can't do. It's like, yeah, you're going out. And again, they just do their job, just collect their paycheck and go home. But they absolutely, some of them will go to Twitter and point out the problems that's happening in the game industry. right? Because just because you can silence them at work and give them no say, or if they do, they have to say it's good because of toxic positivity, doesn't mean they don't do nothing about
Well
it.
written and actually interesting, strong female leads in games. Women have become a box that needs to be checked. We can sort of see this in the kind of criticism that games that go against the current are receiving as well, like Black Myth Wukong. An issue that some reviewer had was that they didn't come across any female characters in the beginning of the game. Now, there are female characters in Wukong, but if you don't meet them straight away, that is bad for some reason.
Yeah, and again, they choose their soapbox. They're like, again, they're looking for reasons to attack this game, and they will use some of the most facile reasons you could ever think about. It's like, oh, I didn't encounter a female character within 2 hours of the game, therefore misogyny. Or, oh, the Black Myth Wukong is not diverse enough, even though I don't think there is even a single human in the game. Well, there are humans, but there's very few and far in between, and I mean, you don't even really know if they're human or not. It is a Chinese game made by Chinese people, right? But it's not diverse enough. And you gotta ask, what the fuck do you mean by diversity? Like, I'm asking the question, and I want an answer.
Reason. We're not letting developers tell a story how they want to tell it, how it's meant to be told. We need to dictate how they're telling these stories so that they will fit our standards. In the year 2000, 24 years ago, Diablo 2 came out. Now this was years before we had any of these new
Hansen's knows that your home is a place of comfort and protection. That's why our durable
ideas and standards. The game's opening act centers around the women who were forced to leave their monastery because of the Demon Queen Andariel. These women are warriors themselves or rogues, perfectly capable of holding their own, but they do seek the hero's help, which can be male or female depending on your class, as they are being overrun by their corrupted sisters. The first mini-boss is a callback to one of the main classes in Diablo 1. Then we have the Countess, which is a really clever historical reference to Elizabeth Bathory, or one of the most prolific female serial killers of all time. Now, this fits the world perfectly, and above all, it's just great for Act 1. Finally, you face my favorite boss in the game, Andariel, the Maiden of Anguish. I go back to Diablo 2 all the time because it feels like you're actually part of like a really dark and interesting story. None of it feels forced. The characters don't appear to have been added for the sake of any quotas or checked boxes, and it's all very natural and organic. I know.
Yeah, and I go back to 99 Nights, Overlord. Like, 99 Nights is just effectively a Dynasty Warriors ripoff, but it's still good because those characters, like every single 99 Nights character that you play, even the goddamn troll has more character than any Concord character, right? And it has interesting mechanics. It's an interesting fighting style that is never really done unless you go to, Black Myth Wukong. But, people going back to these games, right? But again, they don't care. This corporate toxic positivity, this ideological class has just erased the past. They're like, no, those games just simply do not exist, right? What exists is what came in the past 5 or 6 years. And even the good games then are just flukes. Oh, you have Elden Ring, which is too hard. You have Black Myth Wukong, which isn't diverse enough. And name any good game, and they will shit on. You have Helldivers, which the community managers, which are ideologically possessed, are effectively destroying that community from the inside out. You have a fucking tabletop game called Trench Crusaders, where the ideological individuals are seeking you out, right? I mean, because you have 40K, which apparently there's a female custodian, right? And she looks like a male anyway. She looks like a dude anyway, so The only reason you would know that it's female is because they told you. So, and you have these, and you point these out, and it's like they completely shut their eyes and ears off to the consumer, and to the people who actually buys their fucking products, because they believe they're this ideological aristocracy that lords over you, and everything you say just simply does not matter because you're just the peasants. And you have these situations, but you see that these companies are spending lots of fucking money for failed products. And I'm all for Ubisoft because I'm a fucking Olympic Ubisoft hater. I'm all for them spending hundreds of millions on failed products. Like, hell, spend even more fucking money. I don't give a shit. I can remain disinterested longer than they can remain solvent. And I don't even think Ubisoft's a multi-billion-dollar company anymore because they're going to war with their shareholders. So, and that's a whole another thing that I talked about.
In the past, there were, of course, games that had, say, over-the-top depictions with female characters, and an example that is often brought up is Mortal Kombat 9.
Yeah.
But the thing about this is, everything in Mortal Kombat was historically over the top. Like, we're talking literally pulling someone's spine out or feeding their spleen back to them. I don't know, I made that one up, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was real. Like, a whole rating system had to be created because of these games.
Yep.
So, really, I don't know if I would say...
And the ESRB was created because of Mortal Kombat, because, well, there was the case of where just a bunch of feminists came out of nowhere and tried to sue Netherworld Studios because the male Pixel was beating the shit out of the female Pixel. And I give credit to the lawyer that Netherworld Studios actually had, because he was like, okay, well, but the females have magic bullshit and they seem to be able to hold their own, right? And some of the top tier characters like Sindel are actually S rank, so what the fuck are y'all on about? Right? This is how they think. They view the world through this very narrow, childish worldview, and they try to impose this. Like, they know you're never going to understand, right? Because you work for a living, you have two neurons to rub together to form a synapse, you actually play games, but they don't care. They'll still impose their ideology on you.
See it as like a valid complaint. Like, it's there, I get it, but also it is what it is.
Yeah,
however, in the
fucking
modern
cares?
industry, we're sort of going in the complete opposite direction, and it's honestly doing more harm than good. Truthfully, and this is coming from a female gamer who is supposedly the audience for these new games, I would much
Supposedly,
rather
yeah.
watch paint dry than pay for this shit. Or level a warrior to 60 in WoW Classic, which is effectively the same thing. The main content on my channel has been centered around Elder Scrolls games, mainly Morrowind and Oblivion, which are both almost 2 decades old. And in 2024, I was able to grow a channel from 0 to where we are now, because I am not the only person who is so stuck on these old games. I've gone over my personal feelings and reasons why I feel like modern gaming has just forgotten about people like me, in the name of supposedly including me more, but different people have different reasons for sticking to the beloved classics. A recent controversy, which most of you have probably heard of, was the showcase of an Assassin's Creed game that is based in Japan. We have Japanese gamers coming out and saying that they don't get it. It's offensive. There's a petition out there to cancel the release of this game in Japan. And why? Because the game's protagonist is a foreigner that gets to whoop Japanese people up and down the block. Tell me why.
And it's not that, right? They claim to be historically accurate, but then you have a character, Yasuke, which barely has a paragraph of text. Like, the person who changed the wiki to make him a samurai did it just to sell his book. Like, he himself admit that he did it just to change the book. But we know he wasn't a samurai. He was more of a bodyguard of Oda Nobunaga. And them making, again, I don't fucking care if they made him a samurai in the game. I really just don't care. Because again, sure, if they wouldn't have said it was historical, I doubt anyone would. Well, people would still care because people wanted an Assassin's Creed back in 3, but they could not do that until they added the ideological check boxes to the game.
In Assassin's Creed 2, we have an Italian protagonist in Italy. We have a Native American guy in America in Assassin's Creed 3. We have a French protagonist in France. Why could we not have a Japanese protagonist in Japan? Japanese gamers don't relate to this at all.
Yeah, they could have made him DLC, right? They could have made his and her story DLC because this was a thing back in Assassin's Creed 3. You had a historical Japanese game, and if you wanted to sell out of, well, historical enough games, you know, it was historical in the sense that, you know, it taught you about history, but being an Assassin's Creed, it was still fiction. And if you wanted to really get into the, you know, unhistorical fantasy stuff, they sold that as DLC. But no, they couldn't do that. They had to shove a character that barely has 2 lines of fucking character development or 2 lines of sentences, and whoever the fuck that, like, this looks like a dude, but this is supposed to be a chick in there.
And some of them have even highlighted other inaccuracies in the game which are disrespectful to their culture and their country, shows a huge lack of research from the developer side, but I guess their opinion doesn't matter because probably a straight man told them to think that way. I feel like it's a real shame
Again,
that
they're
there's
an
this
ideological
awkwardness
class.
or it can be seen as controversial to express these opinions, because if we're not going to get to talk about this, we are forever going to continue having this huge rift between gamers and developers, many failed projects in the future, lots of people losing their jobs over said failed projects. This brings me to the Elder Scrolls 6. I'm at a point where I don't know if I even want them to go there anymore, because by today's standards there is just so much that could go wrong. A few months ago I came across this really spicy hot take that said this.
Skyrim, the game by Bethesda, is a pro-colonization narrative and is racist.
Now, I did a full response to that video on my TikTok account when it came out, so I will leave it in the description of this video if you want to see that, but in short, I said the depiction does not equal endorsement. I'm seeing that we're starting to have a real problem with media literacy, like it's non-existent. So just because a particular topic is discussed in any piece of media, it is suddenly endorsed, it is shown as a good thing, according to the...
Yeah, and you had this with Grand Theft Auto, right? You had every character being a caricature. So you had females that were prostitutes, African Americans that were gangsters, Latino guys that were wife beaters. You know, you had the white people that were the business. And again, the point of the game, but that was the point of the game. That wasn't Rockstar condoning these stereotypes. Like, the stereotypes was just the point. And I think people on this who think only through ideology will be like, oh, well, if you depict a female as a prostitute, that means you think they're all sluts. Or if you depict an African American as a gangster, it means they're all gangsters. But people in reality don't think like that. It's just a very small ideological group that thinks this way, but they have to, and they surround themselves with other people that think this way. And not only that, you have to think this way, otherwise they come after you, right?
These people. This girl gave many examples of depictions of racism in Skyrim, like where you can see the Nords ganging up on a dark elf in Windhelm and harassing her, referring to her race as the Greyskins, which is an attempt at a slur. But lest we forget, ladies and gentlemen, that the Dark Elves of Morrowind are not too fond of Outlanders themselves, or Enwas, as they call them. You see, Skyrim is an already incredibly diluted game when it comes to heavy and difficult topics compared to its predecessors. Like, I'm pretty sure that regardless of your race in the game, you may see slight dialogue differences, but you'll still have equal opportunities for progression throughout the game. It doesn't really change your journey much, whereas in Morrowind, based on your race, you'll actually have a different disposition with different races. So, I guess you can call that racism?
Yeah, but it's fantasy. Like, the Dark Elves don't exist. Like, Skyrim, it's a fictional land. Like this idea, like, and again, we see this in Rings of Power plus Privilege. It's like you see the orcs that just want to, they just want to survive, and Aragorn was a bigot for not opening the gates. And it's like, look, idiots, like, the orcs don't exist. This is fantasy. Like you see Star Trek Picard, where the Romulans and the Klingons are just humans playing dress up, and these are direct design decisions they choose to make, but it strips fantasy. It strips away the fantasy, and it adds just this corporate mass-produced product because of the opinion of a small ideological group of people who do not play games, by the way, are imposing this, right? And again, it's something I'm going to continue to call out. These are people who do not play games. And even if you have the case of Genshin Impact, where the very people that were boycotting the game for having a race of people that weren't black enough were also playing the fucking game, right? This is this ideological push to overthrow. So they wanted people who enjoyed the game to not play it, and they wanted themselves also to not play the game because they boycotted it, right? This is such a very interesting situation, and I think it doesn't require like a college degree, or it doesn't require any amount of thinking to be like, no, this is just an ideological leeches, like people who just want to impose their own ideology and their own worldview on everybody else.
Built into the game, but it's just a realistic depiction of how different peoples would react to Outlanders in their homeland. Not only that, Morrowind deals with the very heavy topic of slavery. The player, while having the option to free slaves, can just as easily not help, and in some cases make things worse. In Skyrim, there really isn't an action that you can take that compares to that. In fact, the way in which these racist encounters are presented are meant to make you feel sorry for the person being harassed and not the other way around. So if Skyrim, as I've said...
Yeah, you as the character, depending on the type of character you wanted to play in this fictional land, right? You can choose to side with the Imperials and take over the Stormcloak capital, or you could choose not to care. Like, you can choose, like, and when I was going through school, people would always be like, oh, well, the Stormcloaks are the racists. I'm like, well, I mean, all the racists are racist against anyone else. I mean, it's fantasy, right? And to be fair, the elves actually are kind of being the bad guy, but whatever, that's in-game bullshit. But what Americans like to do is Americanize everything, and you even see this with the X-Men, right? Where people are like treating the X-Men like, oh, it's an opinion on apartheid and all that. I'm like, well, we're not talking about people who's just a darker shade of skin. We're talking about people who could literally wipe cities away with their mind and with their powers. If I'm not mistaken, there's this mutant whose powers just manifested, and he's walking around and he sees people just keeling over and dying out of nowhere, and he thinks that like America is being attacked. But what was really happening is his powers manifested, and he just kills anyone within a 50-foot radius. They just die because he's radioactive. And, well, spoilers, at the end of that, it was Wolverine that had to kill him, right? Because he couldn't control his powers. And he was very sad about it, but he completely understood. And it's like, again, Americans Americanizing everything. Fiction. And again, you have these ideological individuals that just take it a step further. And they're like, no, we just don't want to see this depicted in fiction because that depiction is an endorsement. Like, this is what we are seeing.
Is already a more diluted version of events and is still causing such a stir with these people. What can we expect from the next installment of The Elder Scrolls, because unfortunately these are the kind of people that are being listened to. Should we expect anything? Aren't we better off just replaying Oblivion for the billionth time instead of expecting like a complex and interesting story to come out of the next game? I'm also worried about the
Yeah, and you have Dragon Age, what was it, 2? Which dealt with the racism with the elves and the humans. And, I mean, it's brought about because the elves almost ended the world at one point. And because of that, there is massive animosity. So you had the elves in the forest, which were isolationists, but you had the elves in cities that, yeah, they lived in, like, communes and, like, ghettos, but they still had tight lineage and tight family community, right? And things like these is a better way to depict like harsh topics. Like you're depicting very harsh, very heavy topics in a conceivable media, right? Like they do this in books, they do these in TV shows, like Star Wars, the Clone Wars series that were on Cartoon Network. Like, they dealt with slavery, like when you had Obi-Wan and those cat motherfuckers that they got abducted by cat motherfuckers that were just effectively slavers. And it didn't try to tell you, oh, they're slaves and it's bad. Oh, well, guess what? Slavery's bad. It invoked that feeling within you. It made you feel bad, and that's how art is supposed to be depicted. But you have people who cannot create. They cannot create art. They impose values on people. And again, I'm not looking forward to the next Elder Scrolls because another thing they're doing is they're removing even the idea of race. So like in Age of Wonders, your race is just an aesthetic, right? Like in the Age of Wonders 2, you had the humans that were industrious, orcs that were warlike, you had the dark elves, which were sadistic, you had like the regular elves, which are posh and snooty, you had the dwarves that were miners, right? Well, miners as in they mine, not like children. But, and then each race had character, it had development, it had flavor, and the interaction between these races is what makes fantasy. Like, the racism is what makes fantasy, because in Lord of the Rings, what you have is all these races that have to put aside their differences to fight a greater evil that threatens all life in that realm, and that creates drama. That creates fantasy. That is the antithesis, right? That is just the culmination of fantasy. But these people, they do not think of it that way. Do not think that way, and that's the problem.
Incessant attempts at monetization after you've already purchased a game, or if you're paying some sort of subscription. How are they going to implement their store into the game? I don't know about anyone else, but when I go into a game and I scroll to a page in the title screen where I'm seeing euro signs everywhere, It just takes me out of it. Not to mention how some companies just take it way too far, like Blizzard's greed in adding the level 60 boost to TBC Classic ruined TBC for me and for many others. Now,
yeah, again, they wanted to appeal to the top or the lower. Well, that was for the lower goofy percent of people who are just brain dead and they just wanted to boost their way to max. They also did this with Star Wars The Old Republic, not Knights of the Old Republic, that came out on Xbox. They did it with Star Wars The Old Republic, where you can effectively just pay to become the max level. Right.
Now, I know Elder Scrolls 6 isn't going to be an MMO, but they will likely try to continue monetizing the game long after you've purchased it, and I don't mean overpriced DLC. If the next Elder Scrolls game is just gonna give our beloved franchise a bad name, honestly, I'd rather not have it at all. Keep it a mystery, and I'll just keep playing my old games. And that's it. This is me coming back after 2 months with my boomer takes. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I do apologize for being gone for so long. I couldn't have predicted it this time around, but I'm hopefully here to stay right now, and yeah, If you enjoyed the video, leave me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Be seeing you. Bye.
Yeah, and again, the problem is, yeah, you do have older games that are just inevitably better than games nowadays, because when gaming wasn't popular, it was truly an art form. Once it became popular, you have leeches, you have ideological leeches, you have corporate leeches that just want to mass produce art. You have people who, in reality, would never really have a friend group, but they claim to be gamers, and because of that, they act like they can speak on your behalf, right? And then this is the problem, right? The problem is it's become popular. And it's very odd to say that, because you'd think when something becomes popular, when something evolves, that the product itself becomes better. But what we see is games are becoming worse. And that's a not very good thing. But, comments. My grandmother survived the Great Depression, gave birth to 18 children, raised 33. She could pull a hot pot out of any oven without mitts or towels. She could grab a chicken in each hand, give them a flip, and instantly break both of their necks and have them fried up. What the fuck? I miss the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they were good. They were interesting games back then. I remember when Horse Armor DLC got memed on a year because paying for cosmetics in games was seen as laughable. I miss those days, yeah. And the sad thing is people bought that fucking Horse Armor, which is why more companies are doing it. And it's in a single player fucking game, which is idiotic. Something that you could easily have just put in the game. Because I was sick of old games, and with that I mean playing old games I haven't played before. Not playing the same games over and over. I always prefer something new over nostalgia. I seem to be a lot less nostalgic in general than most people. They're actually complete, polished, and have their bugs fixed. They run very well on a cheap PC. They're past the hype hate phase, so the ratings are most reliable. They're dirt cheap, no modern nonsense like not working without an internet connection or having to register somewhere, pay once, and then actually fully own the game. You just got a much better deal overall with less headache. Yeah, exactly. Like, it was, you buy product, you play product, you beat product, you move on. Now everything wants to grab your data, grab your attention, psychologically rope you into playing the game. And again, it's one of those fights where the best way is just not fight the battle. Like, the best way to win is to just not play. I'm so glad more people are realizing that older games are good, and that is not because of nostalgia. Older games were made to be entertainment and actual games. Yeah, and you see games that are good nowadays, like Power World. I'll always use Black Myth Wukong as an example. Helldivers up until its shabacle. Like, they're really doing no different than what older games used to do. Like, literally one for one, with the exception of, obviously, better graphics, different stories, right? But again, even in the past, games had interesting different stories, and their new IPs. Hell, I even say Space Marine 2 was the same way. Hell, even Baldur's Gate, right? You see these games that are popping off, and you're like, wow, they're really not doing any different than what games used to do in the early 2000s, 2010s. Right? It's just now that we're surrounded by garbage, they're like a diamond in the rough. There's clear advantage when you had to play older games on a newer PC. More affordable, takes significantly less space on your hard drive. They run smooth as butter. Well, I tried playing like Empire Earth on this PC. What I had to do was run in the fucking Windows Vista compatibility mode, because anything over that it wouldn't fucking run, or if it did, you'd be like mega zoomed in to the pixelated grass and give you a fucking aneurysm. Sony played games since the early 80s. I think it's been rapidly going downhill sometime after 2010 or so. I rarely find modern games all that good or well written. Well, you have to step into the indie space, and once you go into the indie space, you actually end up finding decent games. But yeah, that's all I gotta say about this. I mean, not everyone understands this. You have a few people that don't really care for gaming that will deny it. But that's all I gotta say about this. See ya.